Good afternoon. We are ready for our next interview with who is Carla Bastine. Take your time. We're running early. Don't. Thank you. You make yourself comfortable. I think that's a fresh bottle of water if you'd like. So we have about half a dozen or so questions for you this afternoon, and we expect the interview will run 15 minutes plus or minus. So, all right. Ms. Adair?
Good afternoon. Hi, congratulations on making it to this point in the process.
Thank you.
Wait just a second. Would you pop your microphone on? There you go.
Okay.
You can start over again if you'd like.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say thank you, and I feel honored to be here. I know that there's a really distinguished group of candidates that are applying, and it's an honor for me to be one of them.
Well, for your first question this afternoon, we'd like for you to tell us about a time that you faced an ethical dilemma, and that could be personal or professional, but also tell us about how that changed you as a person.
I used to be a prosecutor, and since 2009 I've been a defense attorney, and my first work as a defense attorney was a contract with Maricopa County, a felony contract, and it was honestly the first time I'd ever really dealt with felony cases, and one of the very first cases I received, I had to go to the jail and visit my client at 4th Avenue Jail. It was an aggravated assault charge, and I knew that the client had some priors that were extremely serious priors. And I went and saw him. We talked about his case. I had the case for about a month, and then I started getting letters from my client, and they were saying things like that he was going to marry me when he got out, and sexually suggestive things. And for me, it was a dilemma because I didn't want to do anything to hurt his case, but at the same time, I wanted to not be in that situation. I didn't feel that I could any longer really effectively represent him because it made me nervous, and so I had to, for the very first time, file a motion to withdraw as counsel. And it was quite a quandary figuring out how to do that without giving too much information, but still providing enough information to allow the court to make the finding that I could withdraw. And for me, first of all, it was a turning point because it was felony work, which was very different than what I had primarily done, which was misdemeanor prosecution. But it made me realize that as a defense attorney, you have a duty, no matter what your relationship with your client is, to ensure that their rights are considered, upheld, and that you do everything that you can to represent them to the best of your ability, and at the same time recognize when you can no longer represent them to the best of your ability.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I have a factual scenario for you. I just would like you to try to listen to the factual scenario, and after I give it, I'm really kind of looking for how you would handle that situation and any issues that you think need to be addressed, or how you would address those issues. So let's assume that you are a City of Phoenix judge. You are working down in their IA court, or their jail court as they call it, and at that time someone comes in, and this individual's been arrested for a criminal offense. It's a domestic violence offense, so there's a victim involved. And as you talk to them, you believe that you might have some competency issues with regarding the defendant. Additionally, the defendant is kind of adamant that he wants to plead guilty. He wants to resolve the matter right there. He wants to plead up to the court and take care of it in terms of both for himself and the family and the victim. So how would you handle that situation, and how would you proceed?
Well, I've actually had quite a bit of experience with mental health issues in Rule 11 court. I've had several felony clients who have been in Rule 11 court, and misdemeanor clients who have also been in Rule 11 court. And right now at the City of Glendale, I'm kind of the third in line when it comes to mental health cases. So there's 2 attorneys that get assigned people who are SMI and case managed, and those people can be funneled into the mental health court in Glendale. But when there are people that aren't SMI or they're not case managed, they actually assign them to me to talk to them, evaluate them, and see if I think it's a true Rule 11 incompetency issue, or if I think that possibly it's a drug issue, or if I believe that they just need some time and kind of hand-holding to get through the process. And so in a circumstance like that, where you're dealing with somebody that I'm recognizing those cues and those issues, I definitely wouldn't allow them to plead guilty. I mean, that would be malpractice as an attorney if I allowed that, and certainly as a judge, where I'm supposed to be impartial, to allow that person to make that decision, it would be absolutely wrong. I would appoint them a defense attorney, probably set them to a pretrial conference. If it was bad enough, I might actually order that they have a Rule 11 evaluation, just to speed up the process, so that if there's an indication that they're not able to really function outside on the street and participate in a Rule 11 evaluation, if they're going to be staying in custody, getting that started, because it can be a lengthy process.
Thank you.
I've got a multi-part question for you. First of all, what do you think the appropriate role of the court is, if any, in the broader community? And if so, well, yes, do you think the court has a role in the broader community? If so, what is that role? And then finally, what do you think the role of an individual judge in the broader community should be?
Definitely, I think that the court has an important role in the community. It's the court that they help people to feel safe in their community, to feel that their rights are protected, both as a person who may have been a victim and seeing that an individual who's wronged them and in some way committed a crime against them is sentenced to both have a punishment, but also a treatment or a rehabilitatory type of sanctions, so that hopefully that person never victimizes another person. It's also important because the court's kind of the final step. If somebody believes that they've been wrongly accused, or if they believe that their rights were in some way violated, it's up to the court to see that and make sure that that's not happening, that that's taken care of. So I believe it's essential to the community, for the safety, for the functioning of the community. And if the community feels that the court's there to protect them, that they're ethical, that they're doing all the things that they're supposed to do, I think it gives a sense of peace to the community.
Well, I have the next question. So Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels they were treated fairly?
Okay. People are completely different. Each individual is different, and they have their own unique issues that they're dealing with. There's often mental illness. There's a lot of times there's PTSD if they've been in the service. There can be a history of being a victim of domestic violence, and that's affected them and caused them to have issues. There are racial and cultural differences as well that need to be recognized. I actually went to the City of Phoenix court, and I shadowed one of the public defenders, and she was doing in-custody court, and she was also had an afternoon court that was out-of-custody people. And in the morning, I was surprised to see how many Native American people were at the court. I grew up in Page, Arizona, which is surrounded by the Navajo reservation, and my brother-in-law is Navajo, and I was hearing names like Sosi and Nez and Sinigini, and I was surprised, because even though I've practiced over at Superior Court, I really haven't seen that number of Native American people in a courtroom at the same time. And I think a lot of my experience working in Page, my experience living in Page, my experience working for Glendale, Surprise, the county, alcohol is a huge problem with the Native American population. And I know that there are a lot of resources out there through Native American Connections and different community resources. And I think a lot of times, if you notice that that's the underlying issue, doing something to try to direct that person to get the treatment that's appropriate for the circumstances that they're in is important. In addition to that, just making each person feel like an individual when you're doing a heavy arraignment calendar, looking them in the eye, explaining things, taking the time to answer their questions and not just rush them through like they're a cog in a wheel.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant to becoming a good judge?
The fact that I've been an attorney for almost 22 years now, and most of that time was spent doing criminal courtroom work. So I've spent almost my entire career in the courtroom. The first 11 years were as a prosecutor. I prosecuted for the city of Page, the city of Glendale, and the city of Surprise. And then the last 9 years, I've been working as a defense attorney, and I actually have contracts with Glendale and Surprise, and also with the county as a felony defense contractor. And having experienced both sides of the coin and doing pretrial conferences, arraignments, trials, both bench trials and jury trials, settlement conferences, sentencing hearings, motion hearings, all of that on both sides of the coin has prepared me to see the challenges that both sides face, the importance for both elements in the criminal justice system, and I believe that it will allow me to be a fair and impartial judge because I know both sides. It's not a cut and dry thing.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
Fairness and equity are the cornerstones of being a good judge. My measure of success would be if, after I had been on the bench for a few years, I was seeing that both defense attorneys and prosecutors wanted to be in my courtroom because they felt like no matter what side they were representing, that I was going to listen, that I was going to absolutely pay attention to each element, and that I was going to make a fair and equitable decision based on the totality of the circumstances and everything that was presented to me in court.
In conclusion, you know that we've had the pleasure of meeting several highly qualified candidates today, including yourself. What would you like to leave us with in terms of your thought about the thing that sets you apart in this appointment process?
I don't come from a family of attorneys. I come from a blue-collar family. My parents were both born and raised in Missouri. My mom and dad both grew up in homes that had no running water, no toilets in the house. They had to go out to the outhouse. My dad was in 8th grade when he dropped out of school so that he could start working in the oil field. And he worked as a roughneck in the oil field, which is the bottom rung of the experience there. And he worked his way up to where he was one of the most high in demand consultants on oil wells. And when the individuals who had college degrees in geology and thought that they knew what they were doing and would mess things up, they would call my dad in to fix it because he knew from experience and hard work what needed to be done. My mom also grew up with nothing, and the fact that they brought me up the way that they did, I was the very first person in my entire family to go to college, and I was the first person, still to this day, to ever go to law school in my family. So I think the fact that I've come from where a lot of people that you would see in the court come from, I understand I'm not that person who, my dad was a doctor, my mom was a lawyer, and that was just expected of me. It's something that I had to work for, and so I think I can relate to the average person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been nice to get to know you. Thank you
you.
for your answers, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, you too.
We're going to take a break now. Before we say how long, do we have another candidate waiting? All right. We'll go off the record then for a few minutes. All right. We are now ready for our next interview. James Tinker is our next candidate. Making his way upstairs here now.
Afternoon, thank you.
Did you bring your own water, or?
I did, yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you.
We have a half dozen or so questions for you this afternoon. We expect the interview will run 15 minutes, plus or minus. Ms. Adele?
Good afternoon, Mr. Tinker.
Good afternoon.
Congratulations on making it to this part in the process.
Thank you, I'm very grateful.
Our first question for you is about an ethical dilemma that you have faced in your life. It could be personal, it could be professional, but tell us about that and how it changed you as a person.
I think that the one that comes to mind first for me is, as a defense attorney, when I receive information from a client that is particularly damaging, or the client indicates in some way that they want to lie about a fact on the stand. I mean, the answer is clear, of course, for an attorney. One has to withdraw or take some other action to prevent that for candor to the court. But it's a very difficult moment with the client to deal with that. And so I think the people skills one applies to that, and the ones I've applied to that I've been able to increase my people skills in that situation quite a bit.
Mr. Tinker, I have a factual scenario to give you. If you could just listen to that factual scenario and then tell me how you would handle that situation and any issues that you think arise based upon that factual scenario. Let's assume that you are, in fact, a City of Phoenix judge. You're down in jail court, and a defendant comes in, appears before you. It is a criminal case. It is a domestic violence case. And as you interact with that individual, you get the sense that there may be some competency issues. Nonetheless, the defendant wants to plead guilty. He tells you, I want to plead up today, I want to plead to the court, and I want to resolve this both for myself and for the victim and everyone else involved in it. I want to get it over today. How would you handle that situation?
If I truly believed, Your Honor, if there was a mental health competency issue, I would most likely appoint counsel and ask that counsel look into that issue or review that issue and give a different opinion on that as well. If I believe there are competency problems with the defendant, I would not accept a plea in that circumstance.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tinker.
Good afternoon, Judge.
You have practiced in, among others, the Phoenix Municipal Court for a number of years, so you're very familiar with the court. Do you think that the court has a role to play in the broader community? If so, what do you think that role is? And then also, what do you think the role of individual judges in the broader community should be?
Well, the answer to the first part is absolutely. The municipal court, in my view, is where the rubber meets the road. This is where if a person's going to encounter the criminal justice system, they're likely to begin at that stage. Of course, there are those instances where someone might go straight to Superior Court, but we get a lot of first-time defendants or litigants in the city court. And I think this is where the court has an opportunity to make a mark or change behavior or give guidance in some respects. And I think that there are broader problems in a community that are insidious, like, for example, domestic violence issues or homelessness, those kinds of things, where how the court deals with those people who come to the court as defendants in those cases makes a difference going forward for the community itself. Let's say a gentleman comes in charged with domestic violence and he's accused of beating up his wife, for example, in front of his two-year-old daughter. Is it appropriate for the judge to talk to that person about what they're teaching their two-year-old daughter and what their two-year-old daughter is going to do when they're an adult, and what kind of man are they going to look for? Are they going to continue this cycle of behavior? And I think genuinely the city court has a real opportunity to affect people's behavior. We're not always successful, but I've been a pro tem judge in city courts, 5 different city courts for 14 years, and I've seen this over and over again. And I've been practicing in Phoenix City Court for 20 plus years. I think the court has a real part to play in this. Judges, of course, have to be, to answer the second part of your question, Judge, have to be a bit more circumspect about involvement personally in those things, and they're able to do more from the bench rather than out in the community, unless, I suppose, they were involved in speaking engagements or volunteer work or something like that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tinker.
Good afternoon.
So Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure every individual that appears before you feels that they were treated fairly?
This is a very important issue for me, and I have an example that just occurred a few weeks ago in court. I had a client who was pleading guilty to an offense, and for the life of me, I can't recall exactly what the offense was, but a misdemeanor charge. And he was at the podium in front of the judge, and the judge was engaging him with very strong eye contact. And the gentleman I was representing was spending his time looking down and fidgeting with the papers in front of him. This was a sign of the stress he was undergoing, but also something else. It happened that the gentleman was San Carlos Apache. And in some cultures, many Native American tribes, eye contact is a sign of disrespect. And this person's effort to not look at the judge was his effort to be respectful. And his fidgeting with the papers was a sign of stress. But the judge believed that I presume believed that eye contact meant the defendant would be engaged in the conversation and respectful. And so there were two opposing nuances of culture that were going at each other there. So it didn't come to a head. I didn't really have to intervene much. I just stepped closer to my client, put my hand on his arm to stop the fidgeting, and then I engaged with eye contact with the judge to take the pressure off of my client, who continued to look down. And there are many cultures where eye contact is a problem, and that's just a small example of how, in answering your question, sir, I think judges need to be responsive to those nuances and be aware of what's going on in those cultures.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tinker.
Good afternoon, sir.
What element in your background and experience do you feel is the most significant to becoming a good judge?
A number of factors, so this answer may go on a little longer than you had
One
hoped.
word will do it too.
Okay. I'm the third son of a career military officer, a combat fighter pilot, with many combat missions under his belt and a chest full of medals, and a very serious military guy who also happened to be a devout Catholic. And so you can imagine that in that scenario, a child is growing up in that environment. First of all, it has to move a lot. We moved every couple of years. I went to 3 different high schools and many more schools prior to that before I got to the age of 18. And I was always the new kid in town. And as a result, I had to develop people skills. I had to learn how to fit in, but also to stand my ground sometimes. And it's a very tenuous balance. And just when I would get comfortable in a place, then we had to move again. And we moved all over the country. We lived in 2 foreign countries, so I had to get comfortable with foreign cultures. We lived in Japan when I was small, and then when I was a teenager, we lived on the North African coast. My dad was assigned to a U.S. embassy there. So we lived in a city in North Africa and among the local population where Americans, frankly, weren't very appreciated. So I think that the prime skill that I developed from that was an ability to adapt, read people, and see the nuances in communications or things that were about to happen. I think that skill has grown in my experience as an adult, where I worked in the corporate world as a manager. I hired and fired people. I managed a group of 18 people with a $5 million budget. I had significant responsibilities in the corporate world, and I've been a lawyer more than 20 years, and I have dealt with thousands of cases, and I have dealt with a lot of client problems of every sort you can imagine. I've dealt with litigants as a prosecutor for the City of Phoenix, as a defense attorney and a contract public defender with the City of Phoenix. 14 years as a pro tem judge. I have applied and built and grown those skills immensely. Not that I don't have more to work on, but I think that's the key skill for me.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
What level of importance do you place on fairness and equity as a judge, and how do you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I think there's very little more important than fairness and equity. And I truly believe that when people come to the court, they simply, their primary purpose is to be heard. They want due process, notice, and the opportunity to be heard. And so being a good listener is part of that fairness and equity equation. If a person loses a case but they felt like they got a fair hearing, they're more apt to leave it not angry, or at least less angry than they would have been otherwise. But I know that if people do not feel they've been heard, they resent not only the players in the process, lawyers and judge or staff, they resent the institution of the court, they resent government as a whole, and I think that erodes our society to a degree. And I hope it's not overstating it that fairness and equity helps maintain the institutions of our democracy, and the court plays a huge role in that. So fairness and equity are at the top of the pyramid for me.
How would you measure your success?
Oh, thank you. I think it's more of a gut response or Kentucky windage kind of a thing. I get feedback, 14 years as a pro tem judge, so I have a lot of experience on the bench. I have gotten feedback from lawyers and from staff that tells me that I'm doing well in that regard. And I'll give a couple of examples. I went to visit a neighbor of mine a few months ago. And just a Saturday morning, I walked over in flip-flops and jeans and a T-shirt, and he had a workman over there who was putting in some coax cable or something. So the workman kept looking at me as I was chatting with my neighbor, and he kept looking and looking and looking, and finally he stood up and he came over and he said, "Are you a judge?" And I said, "Sometimes I am." And he said, "I think you were my judge." And I wasn't sure which way this was going to go, but I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to shake your hand." He said, "You're the first person to ever give me a fair shake in life, and I want you to know that I did something with it. I'm working now, and it's all because you gave me a fair shake." So that's example one. The second one is a small example, but I was serving as a pro tem judge one day in a court that shall remain unnamed, and the staff person who was with the courtroom had cleared, and she turned to me and she said, "Judge Tinker, you are a breath of fresh air." And I get that kind of feedback from staff on a regular basis, maybe in different words, but regularly I hear from staff that they really appreciate what I do on the bench, and we just don't see problems in court when I'm running things.
In conclusion, thank you for your answers today. As you know, we have seen many fine candidates, highly qualified people like yourself today. What would you like to leave us with in terms of your idea about what would set you apart in this appointment process?
I'm sure to some degree every one of the candidates can hit the ground running. But I think on that score alone, I set myself apart with 14 years of pro tem experience, with the institutional history I have in the City of Phoenix Court as a prosecutor, defense lawyer, and a pro tem judge at that court. I know the people, the processes. I've appeared in front of every one of the full-time judges at that court. I know them, they know me. You could literally put me in a courtroom tomorrow to run a docket, and there would be hardly a hiccup. I might need some refreshing on the forms that may have changed since I was a pro tem here, but everything else I can do. So hitting the ground running is certainly high on my list of what sets me apart. Secondly, I think I have a level of maturity that may be different because of my different experiences growing up that I mentioned, growing up in a military family, my experience in the corporate world as a manager. I've made the hiring and firing decisions, and I've made decisions that affect people's lives, in addition to the decisions that I've made as a pro tem judge to put people in jail, book them in the courtroom if I have to, or to give them a break, like the gentleman who saw me at my neighbor's house. In my view, I am custom made for this job. And it's difficult for me to say because when I was a kid growing up, it was drilled into me, you don't toot your own horn, you let your actions speak for themselves. But I am custom made for this job. My experience is exactly perfect for this role.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers, your comments. We've enjoyed getting to know you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate being here.
Our next candidate here. All right. Bring her in. Tina Sanchez is our next candidate, and she's our last interview of the day. Anna, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Anna Sanchez. Take your time. We are early. Good afternoon. There's fresh water for you there. Ms. Sanchez, we have about half a dozen questions for you this afternoon, and expect the interview to run in the neighborhood of 15 minutes. So, you ready?
I am ready, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Adele?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Congratulations on making it to this part in the process.
Thank you.
The first question we have for you is about an ethical dilemma that you faced in your life, and it could be a personal one or a professional one. So we want you to tell us about that and how it changed you as a person.
Right now, I want to open up. I had a dilemma. I did interview with the City of Tolleson Court. Council did vote for me 7-0. I have not received anything official to date, and that has been one of my greatest dilemma because I have worked all of my life to this point to be in this position, and I am honored as well to have been selected as a candidate for the City of Phoenix Court, and I think that has been one of my struggles in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I have been very fortunate that I have been able to reach out to several judges in the City of Phoenix, in the city of Glendale, in the city of Avondale, in the city of Chandler, all for advice on how to proceed. Under their advice, I'm here today.
Good afternoon. I have a factual scenario for you that I will relate to you. I would like to know, after I give you that factual scenario and you have a chance to digest it, how you would handle that situation and what issues that you believe are present there or that you would consider. The factual scenario is this. Assume you are a City of Phoenix judge and you're down in jail court. And in jail court, you have an individual come in who's charged with a criminal offense. That individual, it's a domestic violence offense as a misdemeanor offense, so there's a victim involved as well. And as you start your proceedings with that individual, you get the feeling that there may be some competency issues. Nonetheless, the defendant wants to plead guilty. He wants to plead right there, resolve the case for himself and the benefit of the victim, and make sure that the matter is taken care of. How would you proceed in that matter, and what issues do you think are present?
In that situation, I have been faced with similar circumstances. I represent individuals that have serious mental illness for the City of Scottsdale Court. Judge Oklavage has entrusted me on that calendar, and many times when I have met my clients in jail court, I do feel that they do have a competency issue, and their number one goal is to get out of jail. But as their attorney, as their protector, my goal, Judge, is to ensure that they understand the consequences of the plea agreement, the consequences of going to trial, their constitutional rights. Yes, it's always easy to have an individual plead guilty. But as practicing criminal law, that's not the easiest way to go. It's to ensure that that person has the integrity of the court, that they are heard, that the issue of their competency is addressed. And so many times in that scenario, I would have to ask the judge to order a pre-screen for a Rule 11, even though that my client may not at that time understand or may be upset with me because they have to be in custody longer. At the end, I think it serves them and in their best interest as well.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
I've
Judge.
got a multi-part question for you. First of all, do you think that the court has a role to play in the broader community? And if so, what do you think that role is? And then what do you think the role of individual judges in the broader community should be?
For the first part of your question, Judge, absolutely. I do believe that municipal courts are a powerhouse as far as involvement in our community. They are there for different reasons. As you've seen over the year, we've had a robust victims law here in Arizona. Court just across the street on both sides have resources for victims to go and receive orders of protection. They have tutorial, they have individuals to help them through the process. This is an outreach to our families in the city of Phoenix. Also, we have a responsibility to inform the public about their rights, about the laws, so they have notice as far as when they engage in law enforcement. So I really think that the court is changing and it's shaping into a mechanism that is involved in our community, and I'm very excited to be part of that. Also, as a single judge or as an individual judge, I revert back to my experience as an attorney. I want to give back more than I receive. I have been brought up that way. I was born in Panama City, Panama. I immigrated to the United States when I was 3 years old. I didn't have the conventional and traditional, pursuit to education. I was a high school dropout. Later, I received my GED, and people were placed in my path to help me along the way. And so because of that, I was able to go to community college, finish with a bachelor's degree from Arizona State University, go on to law school, And then just last year, I finished my Master's of Law at the law school downtown. And so throughout that process, though, I still have maintained my desire to give back. I'm involved in the courtroom experience in the Maricopa County Superior Court. I help tour kids about the process of the court. I also get a chance, if we have time and the weather permits, to go across the street to the city of Phoenix. If you haven't seen it, they have a wall where the security, they collect items that have been confiscated from individuals going into the court. So the kids then, just with that perspective, understand the importance of security and safety for all. So I will continue as a judge for the city of Phoenix to give back, to be an example, and to always inspire and absolutely support individuals that do have a dream, because they do come true. I am a product of that. Thank you.
Hi, Anna. Phoenix is a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure every individual that appears before you feels that they've been treated fairly?
As I indicated prior, I do represent individuals with serious mental illness. Also, as a trial attorney, I protect individuals that are marginalized, that are neglected, that are misunderstood because of their cultural, their ethnic, or their socioeconomic backgrounds. And so I will use that experience in order to maintain that diversity. I am a Spanish speaker. I'm a native Spanish speaker. I'm very proud of my heritage. I'm also very proud to be a U.S. citizen, but in the sense that when you have a different kind of voice, a different kind of look, it just brings a broader perspective to the bench.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant in becoming a good judge?
Well, there's a few elements. I can tell you that as a mother, that has been one of the greatest joy and one of the greatest sorrows, in the sense that you're constantly wanting better for your children. I have a 20-year-old and a 10-year-old. They keep me grounded. They are my support, and at the end of the day, after a stressful day, they are the purpose why I wake up and do it all over again. I would say that that's the major element. The second is being surrounded by colleagues that want to encourage you, that want to see you do well, that most times see in you what sometimes you don't see in yourself. That has been my greatest element as well. And third, just my desire to always be better, to always make a situation better, to continue my education, to give more of myself to the community, to give more to myself, to my family, and to my friends. I think that those are great elements, and they've got me here in this position today. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I think the cornerstone of a great judge is to be fair. And sometimes you do so, and you may not get any kind of positive feedback, but at the end, you've got to understand that you have intensively researched the law. You have listened to both sides of the dispute, and at the end, you will come to a decision that has to be fair. And it has to be fair to all parties. Again, one of the parties may not like the results, but I always say at the end of the day, when I go home and I face myself in the mirror, I've got to make sure that I did the right thing and I feel comfortable with what I did. So as to that answer, I think that that is definitely a great attribute to a judge. In my personal life as well, I do want to be treated the way I treat other people. My clients are my inspiration. I do treat them fairly, and I understand that many times faced as a defense attorney or as a practitioner in this kind of area of law, we strive to be fair, We strive to be, or to make the decision with dignity. So as to your answer, I really think that throughout my experience, throughout my interaction with people, I can definitely maintain that level of fairness.
You began your presentation this afternoon by telling us about the opportunity that you have with the city of Tolleson. What's the time frame of that process, just for our understanding?
I had my first interview mid-June, and then on June 26th, I presented my interview and my ideas to the city council. They voted that evening 7-0 for me to become their magistrate. I have now been in the process of a background check, and the Human Resources Department has indicated to me that it could be sometime in mid-August or end of August, but at this point I have not received an official contract. And I can tell you a little bit about, I have really three places that I love. It's sort of, it's the same concept as being a mother or father. We have more than one children, and we love them all. I started my contract work as a public defender with the city of Tolleson in 2008. Judge Casada had given me that opportunity. And then thereafter, the city of Phoenix, Gary Kula had given me the opportunity to represent the citizens of Phoenix as a public defender. And then thereafter, the city of Scottsdale also presented me with the contract. So equally, if the city of Scottsdale had a position for a judgeship, I would feel very confident in applying for that position. I love all three areas, 3 jurisdictions. Definitely, the city of Phoenix is where I reside. This is my home. My friends are here, my colleagues are here. The judges that are mentors to me, they are all here. So the time frame, to go back to your question, would probably be mid-August to end of August as far as the decision is made.
Right. In conclusion, we've had the opportunity today to meet a number of very highly qualified individuals, including yourself. What would you like to leave us with in terms of your thought about what sets you apart in this appointment process?
Well, I am an example of how someone can overcome adversity and obstacles. The individuals that will appear before the court, before me, are also similarly placed. They are taking the bus in this heat to make it to court on a driving on suspended license. Even after their car has been towed, they don't have the resources to pay the towing and to get their vehicle out of impoundment, yet they come to court, and as a judge, I must understand the circumstances of that individual. I want to be an example. I want to inspire other young Latino, African Americans, minorities, that it does not matter, your past doesn't dictate who you are. It's what you do today and tomorrow that will determine who you will become. And so when I engage with my clients, my juvenile clients especially, I always impart with that. As in my application, one of my idols has been the 17th Surgeon General of the United States, Richard Carmona. He's from Tucson, Arizona. He also received his GED, went in the military, went to medical school, and has been thriving and has never looked back. And so I want to be an inspiration. When I sit behind that bench and when I have that robe, I want individuals to say, that is attainable. That is a realistic person, and I also can achieve that. And so I just want to leave you that. My background, my diversity, I speak Spanish, I'm an immigrant, I'm a mother, I enjoy living in the city of Phoenix. The city of Phoenix Municipal Court is my home, and as a judge for the city of Phoenix Municipal Court, I will carry out my duties with deep care, with honor, and great pride. Thank you.
Thank you for your time this afternoon, and thank you for engaging with us.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon.
Thank you. I'll take the water too.
The water.
Thank you.
Would the board members need a few minutes, 5 minutes to reflect, or shall we go ahead and proceed? What I would, if
I can go either way. I'm ready now. If people need.
anybody needs some time to reflect, what I would suggest we do now is, unless there's a need to go into executive session, I would suggest that the chair would be in a position to accept nominations, which would need to be seconded and voted on for forwarding to the city council for appointment. Our rules provide that the process is that applicants need to be nominated and seconded and approved by a majority of those voting to assemble a tentative list for forwarding to the council. And then after that, we may add to or subtract to the list upon reflection until the resulting list of nominees includes at least 3 nominees for each vacancy to be filled. So that means we need to come up with at least 6 nominees, given that we have 2 openings. I do not think that will be a problem.
Well, Madam Chairperson, I have a couple of different people I guess I would like to nominate. After I have reviewed the applications, had a chance to listen to the interviews today, and had a chance to reflect upon what was heard. From my perspective, I have a couple of different that I think kind of really exemplified what the city of Phoenix is looking for in judicial officers. So if you want to take those one at a time, we can. If you want to take them as a group, you can do it that way either. But I just had a couple that I think that, at least from my perspective, I would bring up.
Let's go one at a time.
So I guess I'll start out with Frankie Jones. Would it be more appropriate, do you just want to do a vote on that, or do you want me to tell you why I think that that would be an appropriate, you want to have discussion on that?
I would like to have discussion after it's seconded.
Okay.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to place Ms. Jones on their list. Comments about her?
I guess since I was the one that nominated her. I think she has a great diverse background. I heard fantastic reviews from her work on her committees, and those are all extracurricular in addition to what she's done. And she's really gone above and above in terms of trying to include minorities and persons less fortunate in that system and involve that in the legal community. Her answers today, for the most part, I think were spot on and great answers, and really told us what she believes as a person and how she would approach it on the bench. I will note she's been here before, and I think that shows her dedication to the city. My only drawback on that is that she does not have as much city experience as some other people because she practices primarily at the county level. But based upon her diversity of experience and her ability to manage and do all those other things, I think that she is qualified and someone that perhaps the subcommittee should consider as a potential judicial officer for Phoenix.
Further comments? All those
I wholeheartedly agree.
All those in favor of putting Ms. Jones on the list of nominees, say aye.
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 Any opposed? There are no opposed.
As a second, I had Tina Solomon. But do we need to do anything else with that?
I'll second that one.
Okay.
Like you beat me to the nomination.
You want to talk, you can talk first. Again, since I was the person that the initial nomination, besides what, in terms of her interview today, I thought she actually started a little slow. Her answers were very brief and not really to where I thought that they should be, but she really ended with a bang, and she had a lot of description, a lot of information, and I thought she laid a good groundwork for where it was. And, you know, maybe that's because she's been before us so often. She is dedicated to this position. To go through that punishment that many times really says something. And, but more than that, I just will say that I litigated against her when I was back doing contracts with the city, you know, years ago. And one thing that struck me when I was up against her as an adversary is that she would go out of her way to listen and do the right thing. You know, the city of Phoenix as a prosecutor's office is sometimes extremely regimented. There's only one way to do something. You have to go through the proper format and the proper procedures, and sometimes it never gets done, and it is very easy for someone to just pass the buck off. Give it to the next, you know, coverage person down the road. She never did that. She always took the time, and at this point, she was a new prosecutor. She was not the experienced prosecutor you see before you. She always took the time to make sure what you asked her to do was done. It was done in a proper format, and all the things you asked her to consider, she considered. And I don't think, based upon what I've heard, she's changed. And again, from my experience as a judicial officer, I think what we're looking for, that's the kind of person that you really want to represent the city.
I think she'd be a great ambassador for the court. In addition, I felt she was confident, concise, strong stature.
Right. All right, all those in favor of Ms. Solomon, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All of us, okay.
The third person I have is Thomas Periscondola. He's a relatively new entrant. And in terms of his interview, his application was kind of lengthy.
You need a
And-
second?
What's that?
Is that a motion? Do you need
Is there a second?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I
Second.
got out of order. I was explaining.
I'll second.
Been second.
And although his application was kind of lengthy, kind of like his interview, he had a lot to say. I don't think he wanted to stop talking, but what he said had substance to it. All the comments that he made were examples. They gave you examples of what he did or how he did it, examples of the way he was going to improve something or the way he went about something, and I was struck by that. The feedback that I got from general people on him is that he is a very well thought of, articulate, and someone who really fights for his clients, whether that be the state or the defense. And I don't think you really have anybody in this mix that has that kind of broad-based experience on both sides of the equation in terms of being both a prosecutor and defense attorney. And those are, if you don't know that, those are two very different perspectives. And to be able to kind of coalesce those into one thought is really kind of what we're looking for in a judge, to be able to see both sides of the equation. And in terms of his interview, I think he had good things to say in terms of his ability to approach people and his ability to engage people.
Further comments about him? I was his reporter, and I heard uniformly great things about him, and I was very keen on him. I was disappointed in his interview. It seemed to me as if he had not had a practiced interview, I'm guessing, beforehand. He was nervous, and his answers were not always on point. It seemed like he gave a lot of the same answers to all the questions. So that gives me pause to think about how his demeanor on the bench would be. But on the other hand, I want to say I was very impressed by the breadth of his background, as you said, Judge, on both sides, being a prosecutor and a defender. He's got plenty of experience. He's well thought of.
Your Honor, are we limiting to 6 on the list that goes up?
No.
And the reason why I ask that is that I think for me, Mr. Periscondola was probably right on the edge of that, being ranked, 6, 7, or possibly even 8 on my list. So I just wanted to clarify if we're limiting the number we're sending up or not.
We are not limiting the number at this point in time. Okay. If it turns out that if we have 14 on the list of nominees, we will likely go back and rethink a few of them. But right now, you should not think that we are aiming only at 6
Okay.
or 7 or 8.
Thank you for the clarification.
I'm kind of thinking like Alistair. He kind of rambled, I caught that, but he was nervous. Sometimes nervous people do that. If you look at him on paper and look at him in person, I find it hard to believe it's the same guy. But still, as Alistair said, I'm on the cusp with him.
Well, are we ready to vote? Well, let's have a show of hands. All those in favor of sending him up as a nominee, raise your hand. How many do we have, Darlene? Okay. So he gets a majority.
Bill, I'm in order. Could I make a motion?
You may.
Nomination, I should say.
You may.
James Tinker.
James Tinker?
Yes.
I would second that, Your Honor.
Here's the next one on my list, Craig. You looking at my paper?
Yeah.
Would you like to speak for him?
I just think he's strong. He carried himself well. He presented himself well.
I'm sorry, is there a second?
Yes, I second.
I thought there was, but yeah, thank you.
Tinker.
Well, he's certainly got the track record, and that means a lot. As he said, he'll hit the ground running, although several of these candidates might. He had good stature, and he's confident. And when he answered my question, people skills, but I sense that other than him saying it. So anyway, that's one of my picks.
Your Honor, if I may, I did his due diligence, and I like the fact that he has had both sides of the aisle and sitting as an adjudicator. I think that is a unique perspective. He has done the job here in Phoenix, and as he said, he can hit the ground running. Two of his answers really resonated with me beyond what we saw in his written application and the overwhelming unity of the people that speak on his behalf in support of him as being, well-respected and competent. One was that he said, he brings a level of maturity to it based on his background and his experience. And then something he said near the end was that, I always have more to work on. And that showed me he had some humility. And I think that's an incredible quality to bring to the bench.
I'd only add that I also heard from many people that I respect about him, and I was really impressed with his interview. I thought his answer about cultural awareness was really insightful, and a little bit of contrast to some of the other answers we heard today. But I do believe he would be an incredible asset to the municipal court, and he would hit the ground running. So I wholeheartedly support him.
Looking at my comments, I have him as the highest rated candidate. The thing that really struck me is that he wants the job. I think the term was he's customized for the job. And in the corporate sector, that's important. You want to have somebody that wants the job. So.
Okay. I was probably remiss in not asking for a show of hands at the beginning, but let's do that here on out. So all those, if there's no further discussion about Mr. Tinker, all those in favor of his nomination, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. Further nominations.
Your Honor, I'd like to nominate Bob Smith for consideration.
I'll second.
Your Honor, I have to say, in reading his application, there's nothing that really stood out as remarkable necessarily to me, and I certainly didn't do his due diligence, but referring back to my notes that I made during his interview, he was articulate and concise, and he had a good demeanor, and I think that he would be fair and he would listen, and I like the fact that he did show that he has some unique knowledge and he's committed. Now, he is one of those that has strictly a prosecutor background. But what I got from him, especially also given some of his answers, I think that he would adapt well to the role. I just wanted to nominate him because I was pleasantly surprised, and it changed my opinion of how I probably would have voted before the interview, after the interview.
Did you get a second?
Yeah, we're seconded.
I would add, I mean, I've known Bob for over 20 years. He started his career with the city of Phoenix. He's never left. He has given his life to the municipal court. I think he's been an excellent prosecutor. I think he's been a fair prosecutor. I thought he had an incredible interview. I think this is his first time interviewing. I know he's applied before, but I thought his answers were right on the money. I know that he would do a fabulous job if he was appointed, and so I don't have any reservations in voting for him. I hope you'll do the same.
It kind of, him and Jim Tinker, they kind of like come out of the same mold, I think. They're working different sides of the street, but they kind of remind me of each other, I guess. I don't know.
They'd be good colleagues.
Yeah, good point.
Further comment, Carlos?
I felt it was a solid interview. I do have other folks ranked higher than Mr. Smith. Nothing to me really stood out in the interview in terms of the answers, but solid interview, yes.
Okay. All those in favor of putting Mr. Smith on the nominee list, raise your hand. So that's 4. Mr. Rascon.
I'd like to nominate Evelyn Hernandez.
I'll second.
I think overall, Evelyn had a solid interview. She really leveraged the experience she had at the city of Phoenix. I felt her answers were concise, confident, and she simply portrayed the charisma and the characteristics that I see in a judge. And so that's what resonated with me.
Your Honor, I enjoyed the time we had with her. I think that she has a tremendous amount of potential. I think she needs a little bit more experience. I think she would be good. I think she could step into the job. I just think that we have some other candidates that might be maybe better poised to assume the role at that stage in her career. She did say one thing in her interview that caused me to pause a little bit, and it was when she talked about the ethical dilemma she had. It's not about the hypo that, or the facts she gave us about having the wrong person that was arrested and dismissing it, but how she reached that conclusion, because she said that she had spoken to a witness. And being a former prosecutor, that made me very nervous, because I thought, you probably should have had an investigator do that instead of making yourself a witness now to it. Now, she very well may have had an investigator in the room or something like that, but to find out substantive facts like that on her own, stepping into that investigative role, that gave me some pause. I don't think that ultimately reflects on her integrity or her character. It set up a red flag for me. And it might be absolutely nothing. But I think that while she gave some great answers, I really do think she would be a great judge. I just think that she needs to grow in what she's doing, continue doing what she's doing for a couple of more years. But I don't know that that would hold me back from voting to send her to the next step either. She's in this group that I have I'm kind of in the middle on, that I'd like for us to have some discussion on, I think, her and a couple others.
Well, that's the thing, if I can interject as the chair here. She's young. She has no experience that I can see it in city court, in a municipal court. And those two combined give me pause. Does she have enough life experience to make good judgments? I think she's insightful. So I thought she had a very good interview.
Kind of with Alistair, in one respect, she had great potential, but young, like, she's a couple, 3 years away from us taking that potential and doing something with it.
The only thing I would add is I don't know her, but like all you, I start with the ranking in reviewing the application, and I had her very high. I mean, I was really impressed with her application, and then equally impressed with her interview. I do have a note here that she seems, she may be young, good but young. So I think that's a fair concern that if we've got other candidates who are a little bit more experienced than we do, we have quite a few, if that was a, she was sort of on the margin for that reason alone. And I say that only because I was the chairman of the Young Lawyers Division and was always telling people, oh, you need to give young lawyers a chance. Stop saying they're too young. Not everyone needs a chance, but some of them do. And but I think that she would be, in 5 years from now, this won't even be a question. Maybe not even that long. But so I support her. I will vote to send her up, but I understand that concern.
Yeah, this is a strong group. A lot of experience we saw today.
I think we're fortunate, or Judge
Oh, yeah.
Taylor's fortunate.
Judge Taylor's.
You don't see me frowning today.
No, you get a good farm team here,
Further comments? Okay. All those in favor of placing Ms. Hernandez on the nominee list? Raise your hand.
Wrong with those guys. But she is
Three.
marginal. She was gonna break out.
Okay.
I could go either way.
Further nominations?
I don't know if I want to go to the level of nomination, but I sure want to consider David Allen.
Who?
David Allen?
Yes, we should talk about him.
I thought he presented himself very, very well. Yeah, he's a little young still, but, and his stability, I don't know, he's had 7 jobs in 13 years. That's a little bit concerning, but he had a good disposition. No experience in Phoenix in our court.
But he has been a judge.
Yes, yes.
I'll second.
No, this isn't a nomination yet.
I'll second that. Oh, it's not a
Oh,
nomination?
well,
Are you
make it
making a
nomination. I'm going to nominate him.
Okay, you're making a nomination. Carlos has seconded it. Okay, go on. Craig, I'm sorry.
Well, I think that's kind of out of order. I think I pretty much hit why I nominated him. I just wasn't sure. Again, he's in the upper third of the group, but he's not at the top of the group. So
Well, the upper third might get it, but
that's the point. We all know who they are.
So I did the due diligence on Mr. Allen, and one of the things that stood out, the theme, was his demeanor, and I think we all saw that in his interview. Additionally, he is an administrative law judge at the Arizona Department of Transportation. He has experience, and the other thing is he's been able to connect at various levels. And what I mean by that is not only do his supervisors recommend him, but I've also combed through various letters of recommendation from people that are his subordinates. And you don't see that very often in any industry. And I thought that was very impressive.
What gave me some pause on Mr. Allen was his answer to my question. Just because of the fact that he is ALJ and he should know, his answer to my question was very short. I took from him that he'd enter a not guilty plea and roll him down the road. And really what we were looking for in that question was to talk about, do you comply with victims' rights? Do you have a conversation with the defendant to determine competency? All those things that we were looking for that a judge would look for and engage that person, he really didn't talk about those. It was more of a process than it was a way to interact with the public as a judge would normally do in that situation. And so that gave me pause, especially because he has that experience, and he should know those things, but he just didn't talk about those things.
I think he was definitely nervous. He gave a lot of short answers, which I was surprised about, frankly. I think his last answer probably was his best one, though. I think it was the question that you asked, Judge
I think
Johnson.
it got better as he went along.
He did. I think he had a really good, last answer when he talked about having the technical expertise combined with, his background and his personality. I mean, I've worked with him as a colleague. I hired him, I supervised him, so I don't know if that precludes me from voting or not. But I would not have, knowing that information and how he did today in his background, I would not have a reservation in sending him along with the slate of candidates.
It does not preclude you from voting on him.
But it's good to hear that, too, that you do know him that well.
Further comment on Mr. Allen? If not, all those in favor of placing his name on the nominee list, raise your hand. So 5? Okay.
How many nominations do we have? 6? We have
1, 2,
7
3,
valid.
4, 5, 6. Do we have 6 or 7?
Can you read this?
Yeah, we have 6.
We have 6.
6 voted on 7.
Which one didn't make it?
Hernandez.
Hernandez, okay.
Your Honor, if I may, I don't know if I hadn't done her due diligence and had heard firsthand about her that I would be making this motion, but I think it at least warrants discussion on Carla Bastine.
I'll second.
Thank you. Yep.
I'm going to flip back to my notes in case I want to supplement, if I could just have a moment so that I can be as concise as possible. Okay. Like I said earlier today, and just to elaborate on, I was surprised at how strong her references were. Looking at her on paper, I thought, okay, she's strong, she's technically competent, but again, I was pleasantly surprised at how strong her reviews were. In addition to speaking to Judge Dominguez, and surprised I spoke to, I believe it was Judge Delgado in Glendale. I spoke with the head city prosecutor for the city of Glendale, Ryan Glover, who is a former colleague of mine I've known for quite some time, and I also spoke with another opposing counsel of hers at the county attorney's office, Noble Murphy. And again, everybody was consistent in what they were saying about her, was that her level of competency, her level of ability to communicate, the fact that she is extremely extremely effective at managing a caseload, with being able to give attention and time to each case, yet not getting bogged down in the details necessarily. And the fact that I was able to hear that from opposing counsel and judges who she's appeared in front of, just spoke to her stability, quite frankly. Nothing, like I said, nothing came up as a red flag. I think that her interview today was probably not as strong as I had hoped it would be, having heard all these things and read her application. I don't think she was bad necessarily. I guess I had kind of expected a little bit more from her. But what I really did like about what she told us today was about her humble beginnings, but also her grasp and respect for other cultures, and being aware and mindful of that. I think that's a really good quality for someone to have on the bench, whether it was the mental health population or the Native American population. I'm pretty sure that she could translate that to other areas as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude my comments about her, but I think she warrants discussion.
Yeah, Your Honor, I would echo that too. I mean, what Adele just said, that I thought her answer on the diversity question was an absolute home run. I mean, she convinced me that she would be very tuned in and sensitive to the folks that are going to appear before her if she's on the bench. I obviously thought she has a very impressive background, but that did it for me. I mean, she has my support.
Yeah, I was warned recently, this week, by the chair of another nominating commission about the perils of not looking at a candidate's full body of work. In other words, deciding to vote against a candidate simply because of an interview that fell short of what you expected. I think for me, this is an instance where, I mean, I was very favorably impressed by her interview, particularly the last half of it. I thought she got very strong as she went toward the end of it with her comments about diversity and whatnot. So, yeah, I'm a big fan. If there are no further comments, all those in favor of placing her on the nomination list, raise your hand.
Can you repeat her name, just so I'm not sure.
Carla Bastine. In favor, raise your hand. Did you say unanimous? Yes. Thank you.
I'd like to nominate Kathy Lemke.
Is there a second? I'll second the nomination for purposes of discussion.
Well, again, I thought her application was impressive. I've heard from a lot of people I respect about her. You know, she's at the Department of Justice now, and she has municipal experience, and the breadth of her experience in state and federal court and municipal court, I think, would translate well to a municipal judgeship. And so I think she'd be great. I support her.
We had a couple of candidates like her whose background has been exclusively prosecution, which is not disqualifying. I think we like to see, in the case of such a candidate, evidence in her background that she has embraced the concept of justice as a whole. That's kind of an ambiguous way of putting it, but, and I invited her to talk about that, if you remember. She mentioned one case that I infer, I haven't had a chance to go back and look at her application, but I infer she played a role in ensuring that different members of the same group were appropriately treated by the prosecution, by the justice system. Comments on her? Further comments? Okay, all those in favor of placing Ms. Lemke's name on the list of nominees, raise your hand. Okay. What do we do about Ana Sanchez?
Which?
Ana Sanchez, the last person who spoke to us, the woman who came in to tell us, or came in and told us that she has a pending offer from another court. Should that influence how we treat her?
That's tough because I don't want her to have a consequence for her candor. At the same time, she's probably going to end up getting an offer from them, it sounds like, but I mean.
I think she'd have to be considered just as any other candidate at
Yeah.
this point.
Right,
in the
right, right.
proceedings.
So that should not influence,
I agree, I'm gonna nominate her.
okay?
I'll second. I guess, comment from, clarification on the fact that that doesn't have to be considered. I was surprised that, there was an offer on the table, and we didn't know that. And it could be my background in the corporate area. It's just hard for me to understand how that works through, but having been clarified, I think she had a great interview. It's obvious that she cares for not just the city of Phoenix, but the state. She was very clear, articulate, and I appreciated her comments on a variety of questions. But the one that stood out for me was the ability to work at different locations. So not only was she being open and honest about her opportunities, but she's also working Scottsdale, Tolleson, and the city of Phoenix. So I think that says something about her ability to work with people across the state. And I think that would translate into the city of Phoenix and how she would be able to work with different agencies and different cases that she sees.
I was a little disappointed she didn't answer the ethical question maybe a little bit differently other than her disclosure, but
Yeah.
Again, not holding that against her.
Well, that was an ethical dilemma, that was a personal dilemma. And it is, that's what that is, it's a personal decision as to which job do I take. It's not really an ethical dilemma as to, how, I guess maybe if you want to try to say, do I disclose it or not? Maybe that's an ethical dilemma, but I see that more as a personal side. I didn't see that you really answered that question.
Well, I viewed it as whether to, ethical in the sense of, do I let these folks know that I may be off the table pretty quickly?
I just wish I feel like we missed an opportunity to learn a little bit more about her, but still, I think she clearly has an innate ability to relate to a diverse population set and understands how to communicate with sympathy and mindfulness, I think, and the fact that she is working in different jurisdictions, I think that experience is helpful. Clearly, she's a hard worker, and she wants to do the right thing.
And who knows, maybe if she did get an offer from Phoenix, it's better than the one she got now.
Yeah, but she's not going to, isn't it unlikely that she's going to hear from the city of Phoenix, that the subcommittee and the council will act in
I don't know about,
in the next?
not by the end of August. So,
Certainly not by the end of August. The next Public Safety Subcommittee meeting is not scheduled until the second week in September. And that's if we get on the very first agenda, which we should, but that's the earliest it would happen. If I could, one of the things that was occurring to me, because what it sounds like to me here is people would certainly be in favor of sending her name up for the most part. The only question is, will she still be available?
Does it
Which is
matter?
an unknown. I'm not sure that it does matter. One thing the committee might consider, and I actually don't know how it would work. One of the things that occurred to me was you send a name in reserve, or you have a name in reserve.
but
If, just in case you send a name up to the subcommittee that then becomes unavailable because she withdraws.
well, that's fine. But a name in reserve sounds like she's her second choice. And I don't want to.
As I said,
I don't want
it
to,
occurred to
rank
me
them that
was
way.
not a great idea.
Well, or maybe we send up one more than we think the subcommittee might want to look at, and thinking that that's going to land, things will work out.
At the same time, whether it's her or someone else, if they're not worthy of making the list, I don't want to just give them an extra candidate just because one might withdraw.
Okay.
Well,
All
let's
right.
go- You going to call the question?
I'm going to, one second before we do, just to speak to Carlos. It is not at all uncommon for lawyers to apply to more than one bench at the same time. That's not, it's not considered verboten. You may be asked about it by the commission. Do you want to sit on a trial court, or do you want to sit in a court of appeals? You have to pick one. But people do apply to more than one at one time.
Lawler, didn't it?
Yeah, I guess my question was the one that, the whole reason why we discussed it is, and it kind of leads to the clarification on the ethical question. It was apparent that she wanted to get that out in the open. And maybe there could have been a better job of answering the ethical question. However, I think that that was something that she wanted to lead with, and maybe the ethical question got maybe lost. If we could have clarified, you know,
I could have
to
followed
circle
up.
back, right.
And I failed to do that.
And I think everybody had the kind of the same question that I opened up is, can we continue with her already having an offer on the table?
Well, I kind of look at it, what if she didn't say anything at all? What would we be doing right now?
We would be probably voting to put her on the list.
There you go.
Let's call the question. All those in favor of sending Ms. Sanchez on, to the committee, raise your hand. So 4? But that's a majority. By my count, we have 8. 8 on the nominee list.
Can you read the slate, please?
And speak, Darlene, you're not mic'd, so you need to speak up, please. I'm sorry. Mr. Allen. We have. I would suggest we should talk about Judge Liu Sang.
He's already retired once. Lives in Mesa.
Your Honor, for the purposes of discussion, I'll make the motion.
And I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
I don't have any additional comments beyond what we discussed. I apologize.
Consider Judge Liu Sang, I think is what Alistair is saying, right?
Yes. Trying to, but not very eloquently. I don't have any additional comments about her. But as our chair has also indicated, it warrants discussion among the group, if the group would like to discuss her application.
Judge, I would move that we call vote.
The question's been called, so I think we need to vote.
Question's been called. All in favor of forwarding a Judge Liu Sang to the subcommittee, signify by raising your hand.
So we still have 8.
We still have 8.
And there are 8 good ones, I think.
Those are 8 good people.
I don't see any on the borderline, you know. I can't think for the safety subcommittee, but I think we ought to be proud. We're sending some good people.
And you know what's interesting is the afternoon was real strong. Normally, we wear out, but the afternoon was real strong. Any further nominations to consider? Any further candidates to think about? People want to talk about?
Your Honor, I make a motion that this is the slate of candidates that are sent on to the subcommittee.
Second.
Is there discussion? Folks we want to think about more, or folks we want to reconsider and maybe take off? This is the time to talk about that. This is our, if the motion is that this is our 8, this is our list of 8. We comfortable with that or no?
They're all 8 good ones. I want to brag. Send them up.
Just from a voting perspective, some of my votes, I didn't necessarily vote for someone just because I think that we really should keep it to 6, but I can't disagree with the 8. So I don't have a position one way or the other. Again, just from the job that we do, I like to be able to do a lot of that background work for the subcommittee so they don't have just a slate of everyone, unless everyone is really someone we want to put forward. But I think that all of the 8 that we have before us are qualified in one way or another and are someone people that can be considered by the subcommittee for those positions. So although philosophically, I think we should have a smaller group, I would agree that that is an appropriate group to send to them.
Judge Taylor, what's your opinion on that?
Me?
No, Judge Taylor.
Judge Taylor?
On the numbers?
On the 8, are you happy with all 8, or would you prefer just 6?
Oh, I think this is a fantastic group, these 8. So from the standpoint of the one who will be in the position of supervising these people and being responsible for the court, I have absolutely no complaints about the 8. The one thing I would say is, and again, it is up to the board, but I have had the comments that have been made to me by members of the subcommittee last couple of years have very much been along the lines of they would rather see more names rather than less in terms of what that would give them. Now, clearly that assumes, and I think they always assume, that means you're sending up the names of qualified candidates. But to the extent you're sending up a slate of qualified candidates, I think their preference would be that you err on the side of too many rather than too few. So I think 8 is a fine number, and this is a fine group.
Good to know.
Okay, we ready to vote? All those in favor of the 8 on the list, raise your hand. Very good. Thank you, Darlene.
I like it.
Thank you all. Thank you for your hard work. But we are not done today. Call to the public. I see no one. Discussion and possible action of future agenda items. Judge Taylor.
I believe, yes, so the next time we would have anything, would be to consider the reappointment of Judge Cynthia Serta. I have no reason to believe that she will not be seeking reappointment, and I would expect that, given that her appointment ends in the middle of January 2019, that we would be hoping to come to you probably no later than early November with those results for.
Is she retiring?
I've been given no indication that she is. So we're going forward on that basis. And then there wouldn't be another reappointment to consider until Judge Hudson, which is actually May of 2019, which at that point I'm sure we could do in conjunction with my annual one. That's what the future looks like, is those reappointments.
Judge Taylor, do you have any other indications of possible vacancies, other than the potential maybe one retirement that you have no indication on?
I have one that I know will happen in February of next year, because Judge Jeffrey, sadly, although happily for him, has indicated that he will be retiring when he is eligible. I've had one other judge tell me that she believes the end of the year might be a good time, but I don't know that that's definitive yet.
Thank you.
So we may be back at work in the next few months.
We may be back at work, I would say, unless something else happens that I'm completely unaware of, I don't think we would be back at work doing this, probably.
Okay.
Ethics Commission, is that still on stall? Or
Well, that's a good question. Ethics, City Ethics Commission, does anyone have any more information on our role to be played in that process?
I do not, other than that Karen Peters mentioned to me that she wanted to speak to you. The role there may be, and I know she was here this morning and may not have gotten that chance. So.
Okay. The only other thing that I would ask before we adjourn is, would staff please, in the next round of communications with us, if you'd be so kind as to give us an update on where our respective terms are in terms of membership on the board, where we sit and where we might be cycling off from our respective leadership positions. I'd be grateful for that.
You know, that was allowed.
The information, anyway.
Stayed in perpetuity.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Fighting already.
I'm listening for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. We are adjourned.